any further ado, I'm going to go straight across to Amanda Oates. And as many of you will know, Amanda is the Executive Director of Workforce at Mersey Care NHS Trust. And she's going to talk us through for the next 10 or 15 minutes some of her experience about the story of Mersey Care. So Amanda, thanks so much for being with us today. I'm really excited about the next hour. And I wonder whether you could just start us off by telling us a little bit about the story of Mersey Care and how the restorative just culture approach was developed.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And please keep me to time, because I literally could talk about this all day, as Kristina will be able to vote for. So I think going back to 2014-15 in Mersey Care, we had a high level of employee investigations, disciplinary investigations. We operate a community mental health, learning disability services, so physical and mental health, and we look after some of the most vulnerable people in society. And we also operate one of the 3 high secure hospitals in the UK. So back then we had 3,500 staff within Mersey Care, and we were seeing a high level of incidences within the workplace, and actually that resulted in a number of disciplinary investigations. And we looked at best practice, so all the stuff on CIPD, all the professional things, all the people's policies, and we felt we were doing everything what everyone else was doing, but we couldn't understand why our ER data was so high. So we continued doing and looking at it, trying to slick up the process and do as much as possible. Around 2015, we had again some really quite high profile cases within the organisation, and it just didn't feel right. That's all I can say. It just didn't feel right organisationally. I knew there was something more that we could do. And if I look back and reflect, I think we were too much focusing on defending our position as an organisation, rather than really trying to understand in the context of what these incidences had occurred, and understanding some of the highly stressful environments in which our staff have to operate in. You look at people, or we were looking at people as a name, not truly as a person in that sense, and looking at the incidents on a piece of paper, often not understanding the context or the environment in which they occurred. So that's just probably some early reflections. In 2015, I read a book. I just want to stress there's nothing unusual there. It just happened to be a book on just culture. I actually read a couple of books, but the ones I connected to the most was one by Sidney Dekker called Just Culture, Professor Sidney Dekker, I should say. And what I liked about that was the language, and it almost played a language to me about first victim, second victim, that I'd never heard before. And it was just something that I thought, that's it, that's what's going on in our organisation. We're just focusing on the impact that it has to the patient, and actually we're not really focusing truly on the impact it has to the caregiver, i.e. our people, our staff. So in 2016, with the agreement, also our staff side chair, we agreed to pilot something. And I must say, prior to 2016, we had such high level of employee relations issues. We had strike action, we had lots of employment tribunals, some we won, some we lost, but the impact was really, really profound. So actually, I think it was really, really helpful for us to start and look at a new way forward, and the restorative just culture was one approach in which we did that. Fantastic.
And one of the key areas in which you, or one of the key factors, if I'm right, and it was also that you developed the work in partnership with staff side unions at that particular time. You mentioned, there have been some tricky industrial relations, employee relations issues, but they were part of developing that.
I've got to say, Richard, I think the staff side were bringing to us a number of individuals and cases where they were telling us that, we're a mental health organisation and we were causing mental health distress to our employees, in terms of 50% of our investigations have resulted in no case to answer. So, we've done the investigation, people might have been suspended. And the impact on that individual and their psychological distress, and the lack of safety they felt with their employer, and the trust and confidence, all those issues were really, really damaged, and we were genuinely hurting people. And I think, you know, again, when I look back, I think HR colleagues will recognise when I was trained, they used to say, if an employee lies to you, it's because the employer-employee relationship is broken and therefore trust is an issue and the relationship becomes untenable. And certainly I think we miss something because we ask what we should be asking, why don't they trust us to tell us the truth? You know, what is it about our systems and processes, our people process, that inhibits people telling us the truth and feeling safe to do so? And it's often because they don't feel safe. And if they tell the truth, then they feel they will be hurt further and be punished and blamed for something that occurs.
Yeah. And a key part of, and I appreciate it's only one part of the process because it's quite a holistic approach, but a key part of the process, again, as I understand it, is a 4-step process, and I think that's really useful, particularly for some organisations, actually in some colleagues in smaller organisations as well. And I wondered, could you just talk us through that a little bit in terms of where that fits in?
So midway through the process, one of the things that we struggled with was how you actually apply it in practice. And there was all these toolkits that are out there, you know, and people will have heard, you know, Sydney's got a checklist indeed himself that he publicises. There's checklists from NHSI, but actually, how do you actually take that and make it happen, and how people understand the context and the questionings behind those questions? So we developed our own 4-step process, which is very simple, which looks at what you do as soon as there has been an incident or event. And that's obviously making sure everybody's supported during that incident and event, and that emergency response is responded to effectively. But it's how that's done. So people used to say to us, when there was an incident or event, the suits would arrive, and you know, we'd be looking at CTV, if we had CTV footage, for example, and they didn't feel the real support was there, what the wraparound support was. So now people do go, but they take sandwiches, drinks. We make sure staff support services turn up, and we really focus on what people need and what support that they require. And then if needed, and I must stress, if needed, we do then have a gateway approach, which asks very significant questions, and it's only if we answer yes to all those questions, if we need to embark on a formal process and investigation, that's when we will do so. And the last bit at the end, the step 4, is around the restorative aspect. And I think for me, that's what most of the literature out there misses. Even our NHSI tick list doesn't consider the psychological impact on the practitioner who potentially made a mistake. And we try not use the word mistake in Mersey Care. We say that something didn't go as planned clinically as we wanted it to go, or managerially for that matter, or as expected.
So could you give us a quick example of how that restorative element works?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we talk about a lot within the organisation is obviously about learning. So I think if I look at the old way in Mersey Care, at best, the learning was only at an individual level. So if it was myself, it was, what has Amanda learned from this? And the focus was very much on who, not what. I think now the focus is on what, and understanding and sense making and contextualising, but making sure that learning is applied not just to Amanda, because there's got to be a recognition that sometimes there are contributory factors at play, some of them which may be down to the human touch, if I phrase it like that, but actually understanding there are many contributory factors and where the organisational accountability is in that place. But it's also very much about reintegrating the practitioner, so making sure that they feel safe in work, doing their job, and actually almost rehabilitated back in post-incident or event, back into the team. Because, you know, a lot of staff tell us, you know, the rumour, the no smoke without fire sort of approach, oh, look, we know what happened, this is what Amanda did, all of those sorts of things can cause equal amount of hurt to employees. And it's really important that throughout any process we consider the impact on the individual, the team, and even, you know, that individual's family members as well. And of course, obviously the patient, if they're involved patients and other patients within a clinical setting.
Sure. And we just had a question in the chat. I just said, in terms of the 4 steps, if we have a situation, say, you know, I'm one of your employees, perhaps something has gone wrong, potentially that might have been the past been something where I might have been suspended, and there would have been a lengthy disciplinary investigation. How do those 4 steps work that makes it different?
I mean, I suppose for us, very simply speaking, the thing that makes it different is the procedure into a formal investigation is very, very different. So if I look back in 2014, when we had 3,500 staff, we had 150 investigations, half of which had no case to answer. Last year, when I had 8,000 staff, we had 20 formal disciplinary investigations. So it's not that things don't happen or conversations don't take place, but they're done in a very different environment, and hopefully we only proceed where absolutely necessary to do so.
So the key thing is actually doing some, what you might call fact finding, I suppose, but some reviewing the situation and double sense checking where you're going.
A very simple thing, Richard. It's before you leap into an investigation, and you know, I can say this as a fellow HR professional. Sometimes I think even in my past and my career, we get all line of duty-ish, you know. So, oh gosh, there's an investigation. I've got to write a terms of reference. Yeah. I'll dot the I and cross the T, and I'll proceed into the investigation. We're actually, I suppose, the process is about pausing and breathing and saying, what do we understand? You know, what's the context of which occurred? You know, I can give you a very simple case in my experience when 2 people fell out over an orange. I kid you not, this was the truth. And I started an organisation, and it's not the one I'm in now, but I started an organisation and I had all these legal arch files about an orange. One individual used to buy the fruit every week, and the other individual used to physically pay for it because the other individual bought it. One day there was one orange left, they both wanted the orange. He fell out over the orange, and World War III erupted. It ended in a huge case, loads of files. And the question that I wanted to know is, why did they both want the orange? Because despite this load of paperwork, there was nothing in there that helped me understood why they wanted the orange. And the irony is, one wanted the peel because the daughter was making a carrot cake that evening, and the other felt low on vitamin C that day, so wanted the orange. So I think sometimes things happen because we don't make sense of it. We don't understand what happened in the environment in which it occurred, and we don't actually understand or sense make it from a person's perspective. So, you know, other examples we've had is when, you know, one individual's gone from one ward to another ward to borrow cushions, and then they get called the cushion thief. Sometimes it's been mugs. And you have to ask yourself, well, what's the organisation doing? Why does that they don't feel empowered enough to go and say, well, I'll go and buy some mugs then if we're always borrowing it from another clinical environment? Sometimes we put our staff in scenarios that you don't deem, that you wouldn't deem would ever eventually arrive and come to us in the adult world in which we live in. So I think it's really that sense making and understanding. Did it make sense to Amanda to do what she did? And actually, I think when you really get underneath that, and you have to hear from Amanda to be able to get underneath that, often then you think, oh, I get it, you know, and it doesn't need to proceed into the formal sense.
Okie dokie. We've got loads of questions coming in, and I'm just going to, we will come to some of those. We will make sure there's some time for those. It's a broad sense. Could I just ask, what do you think you've achieved, and perhaps, you know, what is still left to do, you think, in Mersey Care so far?
Well, I'd say, Richard, I think that's got to be the eye-opener. There's always more to do, and certainly within Mersey Care now, people would say some of our processes didn't feel just to them. So I think there's always more to do, and I think we're on our 6th year now, and every time you take 2 steps forward, something comes left of field and reminds you you're not as far on as what you thought you were. So it's constantly 2 steps forward, 1 back, 2 steps forward, 1 back. But I can actually know, hand on heart, we're better in dealing with this than what we were yesterday. So as long as we're on a continuous improvement journey, that's obviously where we always are. I think for me, at a very simple level, we've focused on organisational health. You know, that psychological safety of our members of staff, or how we treat them, how we speak to them, you know, confined by civility and respect. actually has made a massive difference. And we've had lots of acquisitions on our journey, and some trusts have been in very difficult situations who've acquired. And when we focused on that health with the same people, we've seen massive turns around in organisational performance and trajectories, both around staff safety, experience, morale, as well as patient safety metrics as well. So for me, if staff feel safe, that's the best safety dividend you could get for patient care and patient experience, because I think we've got to recognise operating in a highly complex system like it's health, and don't get me wrong, I know there's lots of other complex systems where human factors play such a significant part in what you do. If staff feel safe, they feel able to tell the boss bad news and be able to say that hasn't worked for me, the better you're getting that alignment of safety.
Okay, now that's fantastic. I've also just posted in the chat, there's a conference paper that was developed looking at some of the results of, I think, some of the reasonably early results of introducing the restorative and just culture program, which I think are really interesting and useful reading. I'm going to come back to you, Amanda. I'm just going to go on to Kristina now, if that's okay. So sure. Kristina Brown teaches leadership at Northumbria University, and Kristina has been working very closely with Amanda and Mersey Care in terms of developing the programme underpinning this approach. So Kristina, could I just turn to you, and could you talk a little bit about some of the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, good morning. So morning, colleagues, lovely to be with you all. So yes, as Richard said, I'm the senior academic who leads on this at Northumbria University, and it's great to see some faces actually who have actually been on the programme. But yeah, so we had a bit of a journey. It was probably around 2019 when I actually met Amanda and her team, and it wasn't in the UK, it was in Amsterdam that we actually met, because I think Mersey Care had such a success with what they'd been doing that I think people were kind of beating down their doors saying, can you show us, what can we do? And I think there was a level of sensitivity that we had to look at with that, because it's such a great thing to do, but you have to get it right, because as Amanda said, there's so many human factors involved, that you have to get that wisdom right that you're going to impart, and also kind of, you know, help people and support them when they're trying to replicate something in their organisation. So yeah, Sidney Decker, as she mentioned, Sidney Decker was the link. So Sidney Decker, when he was working in Mersey Care, he was working with a colleague of mine, Robert de Boer. Robert de Boer is actually the director of our campus in Amsterdam. So that's where the conversation started to link up. He linked up myself in Newcastle and said, you know, why can we put a program together? What can we do? Yeah. So we really just, it was a Amanda, you remember, but it was you know, like 3 intensive days of like literally pouring out the whole journey of Mersey Care from the very beginning, what had happened, building up to the 4-step process. And it's much bigger than, you know, kind of people, process and HR. As Amanda's mentioned already, the OD side of psychological safety, civility and respect, the psychological contract is so important. You know, it goes hand in hand. So it's not just the HR folks, and we're very careful to say that, but really what we did was kind of poured out from everybody's brain the Mersey Care story and everything they developed, and then we just started to really sift through it and thought, you know, if this was going to be made into a learning journey for somebody else, how do we make sense of that? So we did kind of a shifting into themes, you know, where does this divide up in the learning, and that's how we got there. So we actually we started this in 2019, and we started it face to face, and it was really good. I think, Amanda, by then we'd actually did about 6 programs, but then COVID hit. And once COVID hit, obviously everything went crazy, and we had a break, and we kind of said, do you think we should turn this online? And we were like, no, we can't turn it online, because obviously I think everybody will admit that the interaction you get off face to face, and you know, there's kind of caveats to both, but then we thought, well, hang on a minute, should we turn this online? And we did. We had another brain session. I think it took us a good number of weeks, Amanda, because even if you work in higher education, and there might be some colleagues on here today from higher education, turning something that's face to face into and online is just not as easy as it looks, especially when it's something like this, when there's lots of sharing, there's lots of confidentiality, that psychological safe space has to be there. But we did it. So the program itself, Richard, if I just tell colleagues who haven't been on the program a little bit of what it looks like. So as Amanda said, it's not just the health industry, it's any industry, professionals, practitioners, so anyone who's involved in management and welfare of a range of stakeholders. So whether it's going to be patients or your clients or employees, as Amanda said, you know, adverse events or incidents, so it could be bullying, harassment, grievances. So it deals with all of that. So yes, it sounds like it has a HR focus, and of course it definitely does. But there is so much more to it. So we currently run the program online, of course, because that is all COVID allows. But it essentially runs for 4 days, and we deliver the program via Zoom. But we have a range of units that you would learn when you come onto the program. So just to give you all. And of course, you can look at the program site we have for this, but just to give you an example, so we go through setting the context, just cultures, because a just culture can be retributive or restorative. So it's massively important that people realise the definition of what it means to their organisation. Managing incidents, patient safety 1 and 2, partnership working, so that is the staff side, and unions. The organisational design and development, that's where we go into psychological safety, civility and respect, psychological contract, people processes. We also do a really good unit on there. Well, I shouldn't say that, Amanda might laugh because it's my unit. I'm just giving it a bit of a plug there, but I'm saying it's really good because it's evaluation and implementation, because one of the biggest promises we try to make to people on the programme is that it can't just stay as a learning program. It was built and designed on an evidence-based journey from Mersey Care, so that when people leave, they can take the tools and put it into practice. If it's just another good speak about culture, it just stays on the page. It doesn't move. So that's really important. But what I would say is that it gives people a real eye opener from focusing on HR policies, and yes, that's really important. But if you are going to be an organisation that changes your culture, an organisation that has a restorative just culture starts to look at processes, systems, their style of leadership, their training, their education. So it becomes really wide, because if you only have this in your HR policies, but systems and processes on the ground are not restorative, you're not training people, there's no learning, then your system's going to jar against each other, you know. So that was a bit of a journey. The program itself, what we deliver.
One of the issues, and I'll put this question to you, Kristina, Amanda, if you want to come in as well on this, that would be great, is that one of the problems that a lot of practitioners, HR practitioners especially, and quite often their union colleagues have in trying to develop some of these approaches, is persuading the leaderships of organisations to take those on board. And sometimes leaders get it for all sorts of reasons, just because they understand the importance of these types of approaches. But quite often you do have to make a bit of a case. You know, you have to say, actually, this is going to have these impacts on the bottom line, or on patient safety, or on patient care. So in terms of the actual making, if you like, it's a horrible phrase, I know, but the business case.
Yeah.
What do you think that case is, and you know, what's your experience been so far? Kristina, if I put that to you first, and then Amanda, you might want to jump in on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you know, we call it a business case as well, because in one of the last units on the last days of the program, we have some questions to prompt what would a business case look like. But it's kind of hard to do that on the program. It's going to suggest some thinking in areas that you want to do. But what we always say to organisations is, when you get back to your organisation and you're going to try and build that business case, don't second guess what it should be. Don't make assumptions. You have to listen to your data, and that data includes your people. So what the business case was for Mersey Care could look very different. You know, no organisation is exactly the same. Could look very different for another organisation. And sure, when Amanda comes in, she'll tell you they did this. But if you go back to your organisation, you know, don't second guess, even though you'll know most of it, of course, don't second guess. look at your data, look at your employment relation data, suspensions, costs, disciplinaries, absenteeism, sickness levels, retention. Look at any OD data you've got, put the financial costs to that, and that will, you know, even if you're trying to kind of persuade the most resistance of audiences, when you build all that together and put it as a case and say, okay, so this is our current approach to our service, to patient care, whatever industry you're in, and this is exactly what it's costing us. Now, if it's costing you a great deal and you're not doing it the right way, you're almost building a case to say, how can we afford not to do this?
Yeah.
And it's good to have some qualitative stuff in there of people as well, but the data picture of the organisation will tell you exactly what's wrong and the case that needs to be built, you know. And if the case is costing you an absolute fortune, you can say, you know, if we do this, potentially the savings, this is what we can make. The human savings as well as the economic savings, you know, people have to give a really good argument not to be turned that way, and quite often you don't need to then persuade them anymore. Amanda, similar case at Mersey Care, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think being honest, Richard, when we started on this, we didn't know what we were doing, you know. So that's the honesty in terms of it. We just knew we had to do something different. But I think, you know, the economic viability aspect, which is what Kristina has touched upon, and obviously the human factor aspect, because we might remember behind every number there's a person, and behind every person there's a team watching that person, and there's a family involved. So it has a far-reaching effect to what you would expect. I mean, I think from my experience, we've had lots of regulatory approval. You know, we've felt we've had a lot more autonomy in terms of our decision making and our processes as a consequence of this. And actually, what's really important to us is what we definitely think of now is that focus on health. So looking at your psychological safety of your staff members has had a better outcome for patient experience and patient safety as well. So when staff feel safe, the more able to give you facts that potentially they wouldn't feel confident in giving. That supports your relationships with your patients and their family members. If there is an incident or an event and something has to be learned as a consequence of that. And actually, even when the most grave situations where safeguarding is involved, or we have to go to a coroner's inquiry, Mersey Care has been you know, praised about its honesty and transparency, and that's about our people being so totally honest and transparent to us. Because I think we have to distinguish, and the Garber case, the junior doctor case, was a classic example of sometimes when you look at an incident or event and you say patient A was harmed by Amanda, so there's you attribute a direct causation. And often there's lots of contributory factors. And what our 4-step process tries to do is understand the context and those contributory factors. As I said, I'll still be a bit of an Amanda factor in there, but equally there may not be. So it's really important. And I think the big thing that we looked at is that restorative approach works if an employee stays with you or if they go. So we still do dismiss, Richard. So even when somebody is dismissed within the organisation, our restorative approach will extend in terms of the exit from their organisation, in terms of make sure we support them in that exit. We don't just say that's it and then there's no more. And that we can be working very much with staff side, or indeed you know, with social workers, depending whatever's going on for that individual or their family member.
Okay, and I think it's really interesting because I mean I first heard about your work actually through some people that I knew and had worked with previously in the Unison branch who were talking to me really enthusiastically at the time about the fact that this was actually avoiding some of the really unnecessary disciplinary cases that they in previous years, and in lots of organisations this still goes on, are actually not necessary. They don't necessarily improve situations or rebuild relationships. Just before we go over to sort of open it up for a bit of debate, just one more quick point I've put to both of you about the implementation of this. And I think a lot of the questions I see Amanda's already been very busy sort of trying to respond to loads of questions coming in, which shows how interested people are in this. But I think lots of people will be sort of look at this thinking, this sounds great, what do I do to start this process? Or, you know, what advice, what simple advice could you give in terms of trying to start to move down that road? So again, to
well, it's not a quick answer. I think what I would say is, because we've been asked this so much, is one of the things I do firmly believe is you can't buy in a just culture. So bringing a consultant in, you can't do that. And indeed, one of the reasons why we developed this program of learning was because one organisation had made contact to me and paid an extortionate amount to a consultancy to do it for them. And I firmly believe it has to organically grow within the organisation. So we developed this programme really to take and share the 6 years now of our journey of implementation, to share the things that we fell over with, we scraped our elbows and bumped our knees, to share that, to give people the opportunity to accelerate their learning, and also show with them how we've taken a view on this from an organisational development perspective, because in many ways we did that diagnostic dialogic approach. So we did all the data bits like Kristina said, but we also did the dialogic aspect. We met with staff who'd gone through our processes. We asked them what it was like and how they felt and how they experienced it, and some of the experiences that they shared with us were horrendous, Richard. They were telling us that, they were looking at the life insurance policies. They were thinking of options you'd never want your staff members to look at. And we know we're not alone in that. In fact, that's one of the things I get reached out to an awful lot as an organisation. And my organisation hosts something called the Zero Suicide Alliance. And we know healthcare workers sadly die by suicide more than the general population. And we've got to think about, in really adverse incidences, that sometimes when somebody's hurt, and a number of people have hurt, our instinct is, without intent, sometimes to hurt them even more. So what our approach is now is, let's not meet hurt with hurt, but let's meet hurt with healing. How do we help people heal, and how do we help them restore them back into the organisation and practice fully as a functioning practitioner?
Fantastic. Kristina, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. You got to take it back as simple as possible, and I think it's what it goes back to before. What Mersey Care's journey, you can learn from it, but it won't be the same. And Amanda's right. You don't need a consultant to come in and do this for you. We follow kind of scope, discovery, design and deliver, which is a real 4-step symbol. And in that we use a gap methodology that just looks at the gaps that you've got. But it really does start with whatever data you've got in your organisation. If it's staff survey, if it's finance data, the ER data, whatever it is, start to have a look at it. And even if you still, because you won't know at first, but you've got to get used to feeling a bit uncomfortable at the beginning, but it'll break through. So once you start to have a look at that data will tell you, it might chuck a load of areas where you kind of think it's not where we want the organisation to be. Now, you can't do all of them, but start with a couple or start with one. Once you start with that area, it's working out what it hasn't gone quite right, what's contributing. So bring in your staff, ask your people, they'll tell you what's wrong, what is not right in that area. It's only when you have a full understanding of everything, a bit like the 4-step process in an incident. It's when you have the full understanding, you know what to do. It's exactly the same, and it'll start to write the story for you. But just to give a bit of confidence, I was on a call with a trust who's been on our programme. We've had a few calls with them, not on us trying to do RJC for them, they've been on the programme, but they said yesterday on the call again, could we have some consultation? Could you come in with Mersey Care? So I was like, you don't need us to do it. You've got this, you're doing it. And they were like, no, we don't. I said, well, start with the data, but they started to tell in a story. They were like, well, actually, we looked at health and wellbeing. That's what we did. And we realized something wasn't right. We worked it back. We asked people, and now we put this in place. And I was like, that's it. You're doing it, but you've got to be brave. And there's nothing wrong with feeling comfortable with being uncomfortable. But if you start it, it will start, the answers will really reveal themselves. They really will.
Yeah, that focus on the data, I think, is fantastic advice. And I did post a link to, I think it's because it's called Just Culture the Movie, possibly, but there's a fantastic video.
That's right.
which has some of the voices of people from of Mersey Care employees who've been through some of these issues, etc. And I'd recommend any HR practitioner particularly just have a listen to those people's stories, because I think that really, I don't know, if you need a push to try to do things differently, I think listening to those people that does that.